Hi, Athena. We will start the discussion.
Sure.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So, welcome to the second episode of ARNECC Live Podcast of 2026. My name is Aulia Devita Atif. I am a research assistant at the ASEAN Climate Change and Energy Project, and I will be your master of ceremony for today. So, before we begin our discussion, let's get to know better about ARNECC first. So, ARNECC, or commonly known as ASEAN Researchers Network on Energy and Climate Change, is a platform established by the ASEAN Centre for Energy through the ASEAN Climate Change and Energy Project to provide a discussion forum concerning on all aspects related to the energy climate nexus in ASEAN. And in our previous ARNECC webinar, titled Structural Barriers and Policy Pathways for a Just and Clean Energy Transition, we discussed the three pillars of energy justice, namely distributional justice, procedural justice, and recognitional justice. We also discussed the importance of integrating principles of energy justice to address underlying systemic inequalities that hinder a fair energy transition. And in this episode, on the topic of why women matter for a just and inclusive energy transition, we will listen to the discussion on the critical role that women play in shaping a fair and inclusive energy transition across the ASEAN region. And I am looking forward on gaining valuable insights and perspective from today's discussion. And I believe our participants here at the Zoom call will share the same enthusiasm. And for those who would like to engage with the discussion throughout the session, please feel free to submit any questions for our speaker through the Q&A box that have been provided. As I have introduced the topic for today's discussion, it is my honor to welcome you to our moderator who will lead today's discussion. So, Ms. Indira Pratnyaswari. Ms. Indira is currently a research analyst at the ASEAN Center for Energy. And alongside Ms. Indira, I would like to welcome our guest for today, Ms. Athena Denise Galao. So, without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Indira to take over the session. Ms. Indira, the session is now yours.
Thank you, Ade, for the warm welcoming opening session from you. And hi, everyone. Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Indira, and welcome back to our ARNECC Live Podcast, a platform where we explore ideas about the intersection between energy and climate nexus. And this time, we pick up the theme of a just and inclusive energy transition because ASEAN just introduced the concept of energy transition with a just and inclusive principle within the process. And when we talk about clean energy, we often focus on technologies, investment, and also emission reduction. Yet, behind all of those discussions, there are people who are making decisions of it. And today, therefore, we are discussing more about the people itself, the inclusivity, and the process behind it. Because that topic have become increasingly important as countries accelerate their energy transition. So that's why on our today's episode, entitled Why Do Women Matter in Building a Just and Inclusive Energy Transition, we will explore more about the important roles of women in the leadership and also the process of energy transition itself. And to help us to answer these questions, we are delighted to be joined by Miss Athena Denise Galao, or Athena, who has more than 15 years of experience working on the intersection of gender equality and climate action. She also currently co-leads the UN Women UNEP Empower Women for Climate Resilient Societies program, where she brokes partnerships across governments, civil societies, and also climate institutions. So to begin with, hi Athena, how are you?
Hi. Hi, Indira. It's nice to be here. Thank you so much for having just energy transition as your focus this year. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm good. Thank you.
Wow, great to hear that. Yes, so just like I said before, ASEAN is has firstly introduced after so many years that we will include a just and inclusive principle in the middle of the process of the energy transition. And I believe you are the right person to share with us how is the concept and the initial concept or principle to let us know or to align us with the energy sector. And to begin with, Athena, could you please tell us more about your experiences in the intersection of gender?
Sure. And good afternoon to everyone. I guess everyone's sitting in ASEAN. I mean, in this region. So I'm Athena. I worked for quite some time on. I mean, you said 15 years. I think it's more than that at this point. And I started actually on disaster risk reduction and adaptation. And then it used to be like rights-based adaptation, and then at some point in my career I pivoted to gender equality because then that felt like a blind spot for me. So yeah, it's also I think I'm also learning in the process. I do have my master's on gender, but I wouldn't claim to be an expert at it. But I think my longer time working has always been an adaptation. So actually, even the program that I'm working on, Empower, is we see it from the point of view still of adaptation with mitigation co-benefits, but of course, energy is a critical and a central part of it. So yeah.
Thank you, Athena. And it's pretty interesting that you noted that your shift from the disaster mitigation and having master on gender from your perspective. So was there a particular moment that made you realize why gender matters or why specifically women voices needed to be better represented in the climate and energy sector?
A moment. So I guess let me start by just maybe giving a little bit of my background. I started with grassroots. I did community-based adaptation and community-based DRM for a long time. And that required us creating risk assessments with communities, like the most at-risk communities. I'm from the Philippines, if you can't tell from my accent. So we did a lot of CBDRM and CBA back then. And even then, around in 2009, oh, you will know my age. But back then, even when we do convenings for CBDRM or CBA or community-based adaptation, the women would be in the room, but they would usually be at the back of the room or be with each other. So even then we had to make sure that because we were doing rights-based approaches already, we would have to have mechanisms to make sure that they are part of the conversation, that they are able to articulate whatever their experiences are in the conversations. And that required, for example, making sure that they are able to participate, number one, because a lot of them have unpaid care work. I mean, they have children, they bring their children to school, they also have maybe an elderly they have to take care of. So we had to arrange a lot of the capacity building, like within the times that they are available. That's the first one. The second one, I realized that we also had then to make sure that we define like a parity. Like we had to make sure that 50% of our participants back then have to be women, because otherwise, like in the context of adaptation or disaster risk reduction or energy, even now on energy, it takes a while for them to realize that they can be part of those conversations. And the third thing that I think that is a learning from like way back is also that you also have to build and create the space for them to engage in the process, because having them in there you don't get the quality of the participation. It's not just representation, right? It's also substantive participation, meaningful participation in the space. And for that, you have to make sure that you equip them with the skills to also negotiate. So sometimes we even have like peer learning sessions only with the women and not with the men yet. So when they come into the space together with the men, they do have that agency to be able to articulate. So that came very early in my career, I think. In the first few community engagement I've done, that like boom. I didn't because I come from Manila. So I didn't realize in rural communities, And in even in urban poor communities, like it takes a while for people to really, like women, to be able to articulate. Um, yeah, because there are gender norms that hinders them from doing so. So I'll stop there. I don't know if you have follow-up questions to that.
No, that's a very interesting answers for us because here in the energy sector, especially what we have been working under the ASEAN Center for Energy is mostly about the regional cooperation. So it's mostly about the policy and how we involve women in the policy making or or decision making process. And yet you explain your experiences on the community and grassroots, and I do believe it is also important thing to be brought up in this matter because if you remember our last cooperation with the woman representative in the ASEAN energy sector, we only had like only 8% back then in 2021, and our US data reported that now it has been increasing between 20 or 21% in ASEAN. And that's a good thing, to note that women are increasingly aware about their position and about their potential in the energy sector. But and thank you for highlighting that gender are not only about the number, but also how we involve them, in the discussion and letting them know the knowledge on the sector itself. But in the energy sector, when people hear gender and energy transition, many people still see them as the separate issues. And because we are working towards a just and inclusive energy transition, then why should we be discussing women and gender equality in this context? What do you think about that?
I mean, to be fair, I mean, the statistics have been stagnant, no? I mean, it's not just an ASEAN thing. I think it's a global thing, in terms of women, like women's participation in the energy sector in general. And to be honest, like renewables is faring much better than the traditional fossil fuels in terms of representation. I think the numbers are 32% in RE and around 20 something percent for the old, like, I mean, not the old, but the fossil fuel industries. Um, so sometimes I think about like 2050 and what 2050 would look like. Um, and I mean, I've worked on climate for quite some time, and of course, it's very grim. But at the same time, if we are able to see hope, like imagine 2040 or 2050, where we hit a lot of coal phase down's gone, everything, we've met our renewable energy targets. We have all the energy we could possibly use because you said it will 2.6% is what ASEAN was saying in terms of increase in energy demand by 2050. Imagine we're able to meet all of those, and yet we'd still have 32% in the energy sector. Like, and yet we still have like gender inequalities that exist. So I guess the question on just transition is like, how do we make sure that, because how do we build a new energy system using, is it possible to build, sorry, is it, maybe let me reframe, is it possible to build a new energy system using the same decision-making architecture that have put us in this place of precarity, I would say. So this, I guess, is similar to the Industrial Revolution, where there was, so sorry, maybe just to take a step back again. In the Industrial Revolution, when all the steam engines and all these things happened, no one thought about gender at that time. And during that time, I would say that, and it was it's a big technology shift. Like everything was mechanized, economy shifted, but also the gender roles shifted. So for middle class women or like upper middle class women at that time, they were relegated to spaces in the home. That was also where what we call the gender division of labor happened. I know it might be like gender terms, but gender division of labor is that how you divide roles and responsibilities between men and women. So during that Industrial Revolution time, after the steam engines and all these factories went up, for middle class, they were relegated into the home and have to take care of the children. But for working class women, they were sent to factories. And women and children, they were sent to factories because their labor was cheap. But at the same time, they still had to do unpaid care work. So it created that division between and then men were the ones operating the factories and doing all of these things. And then since then, the same gender roles that we have now, for example, are the same. Like women have unpaid care work. They have to be the one responsible for the home, and the men are in more technical sectors. And it has replicated itself like until the Industrial Revolution was like what, 18th century? It's now 2026, and we still have the same structures, societal structures that put women at a disadvantage. And now we're having that same conversation because when you shift energy systems, you also shift power, well, not power systems, like we also shift economic systems. And we are at the risk to make sure that if we don't have women in these conversations, we risk replicating those same systems that hold women back. But that's like perspective. But I think there's like also an economic perspective, right? Because they say that the just transition requires 30 million jobs will be created by 2030 on renewables. But we don't have the people to do those 30 million jobs. So we need the women to be part of that sector to be able to do those jobs and help us transition. So that's the first point. The second point, and maybe this is also like my favorite data point on making the economic case for community development, is that if you have women working, they usually reinvest 90% of their income to their communities and their families, whereas you have 35% of men investing in communities. So when you have them be part of the economic shift that's happening on the energy sector, you also reinvest into community development. So that's like a good economic case. And I guess the last data point that maybe I would leave you in this question is that from a climate perspective, we know that if we do not fix what we're supposed to fix now, 158 women would be pushed more into poverty by 2050. And this energy shift this energy shift provides an opportunity to lift other people, like lift women out of poverty, so they don't have to suffer by 2050 because they already exist now. These women who's gonna be poor in 2050 are already here. So these conversations on energy are very integral, and like hopefully by 2040 or 2050, we'll see. We're not gonna have this conversation anymore of why it's important to bring women in this conversation, but rather they will be the one equally driving those and shaping those conversations with us.
Wow, Athena, that's so insightful. This is my first time, to hear the facts from you that emphasizing that societal structure is also affecting the energy transition, especially women participation in it. And also you have explained how the flow, if we involve women, and then how it will affect their family and also community, and also preventing them to poverty in the next future. But may I know more about how does exactly climate change and energy insecurity affect women differently from men, particularly in ASEAN region?
I mean, in ASEAN region, how it affects women and men differently. I mean, climate impacts are so we all know. I know you also have this data, and you probably heard this a lot in many conversations, that women bear the disproportionate cost of the climate impacts. So that means they have to get water from farther places. They have to collect fuel like longer times under the heat. And so energy poverty, of course, exacerbates, especially for those off-grid communities that do not have access to energy. They do exacerbate the unpaid care work of women. So the work that I've mentioned, like water collection, collection of fuels. These are usually done by women in our region, and not by men. So I guess, yeah, I lost your question. What was the question? Sorry.
How do this
How do
affect
they differ?
differently, yes, from men?
Yeah, for men. I mean, I don't know if it's different, but what I'm pretty sure about and what data tells us, and even COVID, not just climate impacts, right, is that after COVID or after a disaster, we know that women have to also increase their unpaid care time by 2.5 times. We also know that there's also a risk of gender-based violence after climate impacts. We also know that they also have to, like, for example, reduce their food intake. Because food will be scarce after climate-related disasters, so they would have to feed their children or their husband who would have to go out to work more. So there's like a lot of things that they experience differently from men. And then there's also data not from this region, but I think in Bangladesh, for example, is that aridity, for example, causes increased child marriage. I don't have that data specific for ASEAN, but that's something that we're seeing in South Asia more frequently. So there's like really a big impact in terms of gender and women in terms of the climate impacts. On energy, I think on energy, let me think. But how come I can't think of one? I will come back to the energy point. I can't think of like the data points, but I'll come back to the energy in a while. Indira, sorry. The energy. It's in my
That's
brain.
fine. No, that's fine. Thank you very much for giving us the risk of of the climate change and how it's differentiate from women and men. Because I just know because it's coming from you that climate might also increasing the risk of gender-based violence, and I didn't have any thought of that before. But wow, that's a very sad
Yeah.
to hear that.
Yeah, in after disasters, for example, like I also work in the humanitarian sector. So after disasters, there's also always tension on economics, right? Like the family would have, for example, in rural communities, they would have their crop destroyed. So there's always economic burdens, but at the same time, because there's economic burdens, it increases the risk of gender-based violence because there's so much tension in the household, and that the husband and wife would fight, or for example, in internally displaced camps, like in camps or evacuation centers, because people are like together. It also, because they're displaced because of disasters, it also increases the risk to GBV. So there is like very strong connections on GBV and climate. It's a sad story. It's like the unspoken story of climate.
Yeah, maybe if more people know about this, they will also consider more about how we should involve women and also gender equality in the sector so that we can prevent that things to be
Mm.
happened in the future. So thank you, Athena, for flagging
Yeah.
flagging things up. And I think, I just want to remind our audience here that you can, if you want to ask the questions, it is open for everyone to type their question at the question box below. You can just click the Q&A box and then type your answer, and we will answer the question live. And I think we have two questions here. Is that okay if I ask the question from the audience? Okay, thank you. So we have a question from Tania, my colleagues. She is asking about transitioning our energy system will have implications for the workforce. And it is projected that there will be a significant job loss from brown industries, and this would impact not only the people coming from those fields, but also those around the industry sites, including small businesses, informal workers, and many more. How do we make sure that they, including women, are also considered in the energy planning and in the transition?
Okay. So thank you so much, Azalia. I think how do we make sure that that women are included in the energy planning and in the transition? Number one, I know it's not a step-by-step process, but usually it is. Number one is that we should have first of all, there's so much investment for ASEAN also on policy, right? And you've done like a really great job of making sure that the policies are gendered policies. Like your APAEC is now very gendered. You have the gender mainstreaming strategic action plan as well. So one is, of course, we have to make sure that first the policy provides the enabling environment for women to be part of those conversations. So that the investment has to be there. The second part is that, of course, we have to make sure that there is leadership from women in those conversations. You can't be just talking about women without women being there and then making those decisions for women. So you have to make sure that they are part of those and that goes to say that they have to also be in leadership positions. They can't just be a technical person, maybe sitting with like the ministers, because there will be like the discussions on gender is also about power. And when you talk about gender, you also talk about power relations, meaning your ability to confront the institutions that hold the what do you call that authority. It's not to be very subversive, right? We're not trying to be subversive, but what we're trying to say is that every institution is governed by certain power relations between different individuals. So you have to make sure that whoever is sitting in those conversations also can confront the power and is aware of the power. And at the same time, those who hold the power are also equally equally aware of the power they hold. So they also create the space for those that are not in power to be able to articulate and be part of those conversations. So policy, leadership, and the third one I would say is that you also have to make sure, because when we talk about women, we're not just talking about one kind of women, right? Women come in a range of diversity. Indigenous women, women living with disability, women, grassroots rural women. So when we talk about women, we also have to see that there is a full range, and that requires specific capacities for them to engage in those processes. So for example, we were actually researching meaningful participation and what are the key challenges for meaningful participation. And one of those are one language. Like in these spaces where energy planning happens, we use, I don't know, like in regional spaces, we use English. Even if in this region, like, come on, how many countries do have English as their first language? I mean, it's very hard to articulate when you don't hold the same language. So second one, jargons and formalities. The energy sector have so many jargons. The climate sector also have so much jargons. JIET, we have adaptation, we have mitigation, like we have just so many MRVs, like we just throw away these words expecting that women coming from like disadvantaged backgrounds are able to just to grasp and just come in and say whatever. Third, I think one of the key barriers is also location and accessibility. For example, a lot of these decision-making spaces happen not where they're close to the field or the women, right? It happens in meeting rooms in Jakarta, in Manila, or in, I don't know, somewhere that's far from the place. And that means that we have to invest in getting women in all their diversity in those spaces. And that means investing in them, like physically bringing them, investing in like transportation, flights. In some cases, for example, if you want young women, you also have to pay for what do you call that? Like their mom to come with them, because they can't just come by themselves, because it's not like it's a risk. So you have to bring also their what do you call that? Someone with them. So that means that you have to also to pay for that. And then I guess and I'm sorry, Azalea, this like it's my favorite question, I guess, because it comes with so much layers. And I think apart from that is also, in UNFCCC, they actually count UNFCCC and the Conference of Parties in COP. They usually count the number of women that goes into COP. So you would see like a picture afterwards, and then there's many women. But at the same time, they also come up with a gender report. So the gender report usually also counts who takes up the most space. So that means like how many minutes did women talk in those negotiations. So it's also, yeah, they do count. Like you will see like UNFCCC reports that have that. So like their participation is, of course, them talking doesn't mean that their contributions were reflected in the negotiations, but it also get at least shows that there is space that have been created for those conversations. So yes, it takes a lot to make sure that they are including in planning, but maybe I'll stop there and maybe give you more like the list maybe later on.
Well, thank you, Athena. You just underlined that in gender issues, especially maybe gender equality or woman empowerment, everything is connected towards each other. And it is not simple but and very challenging, but we should consider it in our policy decision making process, especially in the energy sector. And just to let the audience know that the ASEAN Center for Energy has endorsed our very first ACE Inclusivity Pledge last year, and from starting from that point, we have started to include woman gender equality on every on every event that we organize. It means that there will be no, hopefully no men panel on our discussion on our panel or on our event. And we also, just like you said, when a woman, especially when a young girl are invited, they might take up their mom or their relatives to be there. And we did that on our ASEAN Energy Gender Forum. But the case is we invited our expert, and she brought her child. And we also, yeah, she also brought her mother. And that's how we reflect our inclusivity within the ACE or ASEAN environment, especially on the energy sector. And thank you very much for also pointed out that there are so many layers of women, including indigenous women, indigenous people, and also person with disabilities and grassroots, because we also started to invite it indigenous person, people with disabilities, community as well on our last ASEAN Energy Gender Week, so that our discussion on the policy on energy policy and also decision making is comprehensive and touching upon all the community and all the women, so it will be more inclusive for the energy discussion. And I think this pretty much align with what you have been doing in UN Women, or your program itself, your Empower program. And maybe could you please let us know what is the Empower and how it is related to gender equality, especially women in this sector?
Thank you so much. And of course, I'm so happy to hear about all the advancement that ACE has done. I'm so proud. No, so Empower has been a long-running program for UN Women and the UN Environment Program. So it's a joint program between two agencies. Maybe just to give a little bit of background. Of course, UN Women were the entity who drives, who's supposed to lead all the not all discussions, because UN agencies also have to do gender, but we're the entity that or like coordinates all the other UN agencies on gender. And of course, UNEP is the environment agency. So we came together with very complementary capacities, which I don't think exist anywhere else, to be honest. So we've been running this program for 8.5 years now. And ACE has been my partner, I think, for most of it, to be honest. Like 5 years, I think, is together with ACE. So Empower is a gender and climate energy disaster risk reduction program that aims to bring human rights and gender equality in those spaces. When we also, maybe just a background also, when we started, like a lot of these changes, I mean, the changes that we've discussed now, Indira, are changes that are recent, no? Because when we started back in 2018, which was the first year, there was very little mention, for example, in naturally determined contributions about gender. It was like 15% was the data. Only 15% of NDCs had gender considerations. And now we're like moving into NDC 3.0 where we have at least 85% of, I don't know the final count because there are still member states that are submitting, but in the last NDC 2.0, at least 81 to 85% of gender consideration. So the landscape was quite different. So what we do in Empower is, I think, it's many things because like you can just imagine climate DRR and climate and energy, but maybe for the purpose of energy, so we make sure that so we work at the national and also at the regional level, and in some cases we also work at subnational. So one is, of course, we work with on policy, and you know that because we've been partners on creating policy at the regional level, but also at the national, informing NDCs. But also part of the policy work is generating data. So we have baselines for those policies, and facilitating coordination across ministries. I know ASEAN, I mean, I've worked in ASEAN, not in ASEAN, but with ASEAN for a long time. So I know cross-pillar, cross-sectoral engagement can be quite challenging at the regional level, but it's the same challenges that you can see at the national level. So Empower works to make sure that like we have all these policy spaces that are converging. The second is that we also work on finance. I know you talked about earlier in your spiel in the beginning that in like when we talk about energy, we always just talk about technology and investments. So in Empower, we also do the same. I mean, because we cannot talk about energy transition without talking about like where will we get the money to finance the transition, and where do we get the money to support women to lead those transitions. So we also do climate financing and or energy financing. We work with different financial institutions, from banks to microfinance institutions to fund managers, to create like available financing for women entrepreneurs, to adopt RE technology and use it for their livelihoods. I think the other part I want to also share is that we also work on skills, because a lot of times we assume that we create technology and then people know how to use it or how to maximize it, but that's not really the case. So we also build capacities around adoption of RE, for to strengthen business, business or livelihoods. And then the last bit I want to maybe share is that, of course, we work at the regional level and sub-regional, but part of that process is also working with civil society organizations, to make sure that they are able to bring the voices of the most at risk into decision-making spaces. So we have, for example, worked with the Right Energy Partnership, to create a just transition roadmap for Indigenous women and girls. So there's that component. I mean, Empower is a big program. It's been running for 8 years. So yeah, so that's who we are.
Great to hear that, Athena. And I think since you brought up about the challenge on having cross-pillar collaboration, I think we both agree. I mean, we all agree that climate change is not only multifaceted issue, but it is multi-ministerial issue because that is the same challenges that we in ACE also try to solve. And we also starting to invite the Ministry of Women of ASEAN to our conversations, just to make sure that we have this alignment between the Ministry of Women, Ministry of Environment, and also Ministry of Energy, for the energy transition. And it is good to know that most of the Ministry of Women of ASEAN member states have already established their own plan, especially on climate change mitigation, which put more emphasis on women participations and also gender equality. However, the challenges remain on how to mainstream it on other ministry as well, so that they will have a formal regulation or an official regulation to put women in a leadership role, or maybe to have certain target about women participation on the policy making process. And I think that is also interesting to know that you empower also working on skills, and also collaborated with CSO, because we also have collaboration with Oxfam on the workforce project, and I do believe we can maybe discuss sometimes if we have if you're interested to have more collaboration on workforce and also skills. And talking about empower, thank you very much for your clear and strong explanation about Empower program. And I believe that it has been implemented across several ASEAN countries, for example, Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. And based on your experience, what is your common challenges that you observed in advancing women participation? Because from your from what you addressed just now, you mentioned that you also work with grassroots people, community who might have a different understanding or different perspectives about this. So, what is your challenges?
Challenges. I mean, the challenges come from many different stakeholders, no? It's not just the women. It's also, for example, governments. I mean, I guess one challenge within the climate and energy sector is that we always say that we have to prioritize one over the other, right? Like, oh, energy first, energy security first, and then we'll talk about gender after, or climate first. So we also have to do a little bit of convincing with those that are what we call duty bearers, or those sitting in the governments, to say that even in private sector, to say that women are important in that women are that women has to be part of those discussions. On the side of working with women and getting them into the just transition space, I think there's many things, because our entry point for us is, and I think not just for us, I think for those women, for those organizations working on climate, the easy entry point, if the easy entry point is entrepreneurship, because it it doesn't require, like, it's still like private sector or financing still perceives women as risky investments, right? Like, technology shift is already risky for private sector, but also women is highly risky, because a lot of the private financing is made for a specific person. It's made for a specific idea of a person. And that idea is like, it's a man, it's like a man with a formal job. It's a person with a bank, like a, what do you call that? With a bank account. So one of the challenges that we have to contend with is, how do we make sure that if we are bringing the women, we are also bringing the resources needed for them to participate. So, for example, finance. So a lot of the work that has gone through, and this is definitely led by UNEP. So a lot of the work of convincing financial actors to invest in women and see them as, like, bankable investments that can have an ROI, is something that we have to work with. Yeah. So one is finance. The second one, I think, is also, what is the second one? One is also for women, because they also think that maybe it's not a place where they can contribute in, or it's also risky for them to shift. For example, if you're working in a business, for you to pay for a technology to use in the business, you have to make the business case. But a lot of women also don't have disposable income or working capital to do that. So when we work with them, we also have to build their capacity to see what is the business development that can happen. So it's also like a conversation. So, because if we suddenly, like, put them in a position where they take loans from the finance that we've unlocked, for example, but then the business fails, then they're not better off than when we started the program, right? Because they're now in debt, for example, their business is failing. So we have to also create that capacity within women to be able to do the shifts themselves, and really also take the risk. I mean, take the risk, but responsibly. So those are some of the things that we've been working on in the last few years of trying to figure out the demand and the supply side of getting women into the energy transition. And to really showcase, because I guess on both sides, both the finance and the women, what we want to prove is that women are already leaders in the can be leaders in energy adoption, but also leaders in their communities. But on the finance side, we have to make the business case that investing in women, because right now we're giving grants to financing institutions for them to invest in women. But what we want to see is that using this example now under Empower, they're able to unlock the finance themselves and continue without us. And it becomes a market model that we don't like, that they see it really as an important investment. And that's, I guess, the idea for scaling from our side too. Like that's both the challenges, but also where we hope to be when the program ends.
Thank you, Athena. I think this is also reminding me of one of the discussions that I had during the ASEAN Energy Gender Week. Well, there was a community-based energy in rural area in the Philippines, and she said that in the rural area itself, there are also still challenges where women need their husband's approval to open a loan or open a bank account, and therefore it hinders them to maybe to start their entrepreneurship skill or to start their business because they need approval from other person, where I think it is unfair for a woman who wanted to develop themselves and to make differences, for example, to establish a business, and for having other person to approve that decision that is not coming from them. And it's so sad to hear that, but I think they are working on the local bank for that, and I do hope that it will change by time. And I think we received so many questions here in the
I know,
question
right?
box. So let's just jump into the Q&A. I will read from Lantran. He or she asked about how can unconscious bias against women in a just energy transition be identified and addressed, both in terms of access to employment opportunities and access to affordable and sustainable energy.
How can unconscious bias against women in a just, it also baffles me, Lan, because for quite some time, we've proven that when we bring women into wherever the business, for example, I read somewhere that if you bring women, like in organizations that invest in women, for example, in women's leadership, reduces, for example, energy consumption by 60%. There's always data that comes. And I don't know what the challenge is in terms of unconscious bias at this point, because the data is available on what you can get when you bring women. And to be honest, so from a procedural perspective, what usually happens is that like organizations have to define their recruitment policies. There like all the different policies in the office. And so for example, I worked with a different, not an energy organization, but I used to work with an organization where I supported them in developing their HR policies and guidelines. So we assessed all the guidelines and the policies, and we assessed where there are gender biases in the recruitment process, and we tried to take those out. So it requires like what we call a gender audit, to look at all these policies and those norms within the institution to see where the challenges are and how do you work with leadership to take them out. So I guess these unconscious bias have to be put in to become conscious and to be formalized, because when it's unwritten, it's where the challenge happens. So I think from at the onset, you can do a gender audit, and then you can look at all the HR policies and recruitment policies. And then also all the HR other policies, because I also know from the report reports on energy. I think it was from Irina who said that a lot of the challenges, there's many challenges to getting like entering, retention, and also leadership. And each of the steps, what is consistent is that there has to be like workplace flexibility. For example, there has to be like a quota, like a targeting. When you start recruitment, there has to be targets that are set for how many women have to be there. So there are like things that you can do within the workplace that can allow you to address those unconscious, but that has to be conscious biases, and then provided opportunities for women. And access to affordable and sustainable energy, I think that requires really bringing those that you are targeting. So if, for example, if you're looking to extending the grid to indigenous communities and geographically isolated communities, then you have to bring them in those conversations to ensure that they are able that energy is exactly what they need to be able to develop their communities. I think, to be honest, for me, the much more easier part to do this is, I actually both are very difficult, but there is a process to both that we can actually follow that has been tested by others. And I think that also brings, and I'm sorry if I jump off to the question also on like how can regional cooperation avoid replicating best practices and instead create mechanisms that are adaptable. I think, yeah, a lot of the discussions in climate and energy is always talking about scaling up best practices, right? And sometimes it's devoid of context specific, that we take out the practice out of the context where it actually flourished. So when we talk about regional cooperation, like it assumes that the experiences are the same everywhere. Like a province in like Sreumbel in Cambodia would be the same in Da Nang in Vietnam, and maybe like Cebu in the Philippines, whereas it's not. So when we talk about replication and scaling up, I think we scale up the processes, or like we see what are the processes that work, but we still have to come back and contextualize to the context of the different countries, and that requires us still bringing the actual stakeholders to be part of contextualizing those replicable best practices, because what can work in one place, we don't know if it's going to work in the other place. But I know it's always a challenge though when you talk about scaling up, because when you talk about scaling up, we also talk about investments, and and the investments require like what we call this consistency in implementation. So sometimes we really are looking for that unicorn solution that can work for everywhere, but in my experience it cannot, because the context is just very different. But that doesn't still hold us back from still doing regional cooperation. I think the value of ASEAN is really is that the diversity of us in ASEAN brings different stories and versions of solutions that can be contextualized, and I think that's us coming together as one. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Athena. Yes, I would like to, add more from your answer regarding the replicative solution in the regional cooperation. Well, actually, when we are working with the regional cooperation itself, we need to have mutual understanding on how we define this issue and how we will, how we will see the vision of the issue itself. And for that, it needs more time because different countries and different region different countries has their own national priorities, which we should involve as a consideration while we are drafting the regional cooperation document. And therefore the time might be, longer than we are expected. But what we can do right now, as especially for ACE, as a regional cooperation institution, especially for the energy sector, is we mainstream the knowledge first of gender equality and also disabilities and social inclusion on every of our organized events, so that we can raise the awareness of having this principle of inclusivity within the energy cooperation itself. And yes, Athena, it is also important to, contextualize the matter of gender equality, because each country has different definition, each country has different cooperation, and also how to say flow, to integrate and to mainstream the policy until their for their own community. So it's a challenging one, I would say. And let's continue for the next questions. I think we have question
Maybe
from
I can add a little bit more. Actually, that made me think on the contextualization, because now we're talking about gender, right? And gender
yes.
norms is quite different also for even for ASEAN countries. Like we have, I don't know, even the pay gap is different. The gender norms, what is acceptable to me as a Filipino girl, is not maybe the same expectations that you have as. So when you work also on gender and then in the intersection of gender, energy, and climate, that solutions really have to be contextualized, because you're not just trying to achieve climate goals or energy objectives, right? You're also trying to transform gender relations and address gender inequalities. That's very context specific to that specific area or community. So yeah, I'll stop there because there's more questions, guys.
That's why this is a very, I believe this is a very interesting conversation that's happening between gender and the energy sector. And I do believe that there will be more like questions like this in the future. So that's why we initiate this discussion, just to, make the alignment between the gender and energy sector. And I think these two questions that we haven't answered yet pretty much aligning with the future plan of the gender equality in the energy sector. Let's start from Kyla Belfa. So, we're talking about youth now. As a young woman, how can we actively contribute to a future where by 2050 we no longer need to have a conversation about why women should be in the conversation?
Thank you so much, Kyla, and I'm so happy that you're here. I'm so happy that you're taking part of these conversations with us. What you can do, I think, is I think like in all advocacy, there's always levels to it. No, one is that the people that you can influence around you. And of course, you talk about the issues, the gender issues that you see, but also I think what's worked for me at least is and maybe I don't know if you want to copy me, but if you do, I mean, you work with institutions that do champion gender equality in the context of energy or in the context of climate. I think working in those institutions and being the champion in those institutions and finding your peers in those institutions that can work with you, I think those are the most magical things that can happen to really push change. I think, yeah, like finding like-minded people to work with you, and just persisting, because it's a tough world. You're in the energy sector, so I think you also have. So one is looking for peers, but I think that what's important that I've heard other people say is also finding the mentor that can help you in the journey for you to become the best version of yourself, in to push for this work forward. So, and this is a call to those maybe that are not as young as Kyla, maybe those that are also here in the call that are ready to take mentees. Please do that, because I think that also helps increase women's confidence in the sector, but also them having role models that they can really maybe, because yeah, not aspire to, but work with, be in the journey with them. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Athena. We almost talk about 1 hour, and I didn't feel like it's
Yeah,
one
that's true.
hour. session. But maybe for closing question, let's answer the question from Nyoman Sakar Ayu Parameswari. She's curious regarding the next step after women being included in the meaningful participation.
Wait, so have there been any policies and that are built from the voice? You know, I don't know if there's been policies that have been built with women's voices. To be honest, in my career, I have not seen. But I have seen some NDCs, for example, that grassroots organizations have been able to inform and that governments were able to adopt. But that's only very recent. I mean, it's in the last NDC 3.0. The next step after that is that it doesn't end in participating in decision-making spaces, but they are still part of the implementation process and ensuring accountability. So the next steps would be creating benchmarks. I mean, I know it's so procedural. It's not very aspirational. But the next steps is really creating the implementation plan that still brings them in that space. Making sure that investments or financing to implement those plans have gender targets at the same time, and of course, data. I mean, we love data. I know there's also like a dearth and not a lot of data to measure. I know ACE is working really hard to make sure that there is, but that's also like something that has to be done when the policies are already in place to make sure that we are actually meeting the objectives of those policies. So I'll stop there.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Athena, for this talk. Actually, it's been 1 hour of our discussion, and thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights with us today. We learned a lot about how women should be included in the energy sector, not only as a number, because women is being included doesn't mean that they are included in the policy or decision-making process, and therefore we need to encourage them to have more involvement on the decision-making process. And this discussion reminding me that a just and inclusive energy transition is not only about cleaner technologies or stronger policies, but it is also ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to contribute, to lead, and benefit from the transformations. Well, I think this comes as my closing statement. So thank you very much to our listeners and thank you for joining us. And if you enjoyed us for today's conversation, don't forget to follow Accept social media for more discussions on energy and climate and also gender intersection in ASEAN sector. And thank you very much, Athena, for this wonderful discussion. Let's continue talk on email.
Maraming salamat.
Yeah,
Have a good day, everyone.
Oh, and I will get this back to Adef.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Indira and Ms. Athena, for the engaging discussion and the valuable insight throughout the session. And thank you also for the audience for the very engaging questions. So to summarize today's discussion, we have touched upon many aspects from the importance of women participation and inclusion in the energy sector, and also the challenges that we face to advance women's inclusion in such spaces, the differential impact of climate change between women and men, on what can be done to make sure that women are considered in energy planning and also in the energy transition. And we've also answered many questions from the audience, such as how to address unconscious bias, for example, and also how youths can actively contribute on gender issues. So it is really an insightful discussion that we've had today. So before we conclude today's session, I would like to invite both Ms. Indira and Ms. Athena for a brief photo session. So please get ready and prepare your smiles for the camera. Okay, ready? I will lead the countdown in 3, 2, 1. Okay, one more time, please. 3, 2, 1. All right, thank you everyone. And that concludes today's ARNECC Live Podcast on our Just and Inclusive Energy Transition series. Thank you everyone for being part of today's discussion. We hope that the discussion provides new insights and valuable perspective for all of our participants. And please stay connected with us through our social media channels, newsletters, and website. to keep up with the latest updates on ARNECC and also developments within ASEAN and within ASEAN energy and climate landscape. So I am Aulia Daveta. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to seeing you again in our future ARNECC webinars. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.